overnight.
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Morning, Leith. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good, thanks, Phil. How about yourself?
I'm okay. I see that you've got it in for the Treasurer. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, so as you know, recent surveys show that sort of trust in our politicians is at a record low. And one of the reasons is that our politicians, continue to spin a lot of spin and sort of misleading statements and that sort of thing about the state of the economy and all that sort of thing. And we see that, we've witnessed that quite a bit, with respect to, say, energy costs. So the government keeps telling us that our power bill is going to come down because of all this renewable energy and that sort of thing. But the lived experience obviously shows that costs keep going up. So that's just one of the areas. But one of the biggest purveyors of this spin is actually Treasurer Jim Chalmers. So I'm going to be a little bit cheeky, Phil. I'm going to call him Spin Jim.
All right, that's good.
Because over the past few weeks, he's been sort of caught spreading a whole bunch of spin about the economy and housing market, which doesn't really stand up to scrutiny, and it's a little bit misleading. And just to go run through a few of these examples, a few weeks back, Spin Jim claimed that Labor had delivered, quote, the longest period of consecutive real wage growth in almost a decade. Now, the interesting thing about this statement is that it literally came out just as the Australian Bureau of Statistics reported that real wages fell by 0.5% in the June quarter, and wages are tracking at around the same levels they were in mid-2011. So we've experienced a massive fall in real wages. Now, admittedly, a lot of that happened under the former government when we had that higher inflation, but it's just simply not correct for Jim Chalmers to basically say that, that delivered the longest period of consecutive real wage growth when wages literally just fallen. Obviously, we're tracking at mid-2011 levels. It's even worse than that, because if you actually unpack the sources of the wage growth, the public sector has enjoyed the strongest pay in the past year. So public sector wages went up by 3.8%, whereas the private sector, which is where most of us live, has actually seen a very sharp slowing in wage growth, and it's well below inflation. It only grew by 3.2% in the year to September. And the picture's even worse when you factor in the fact that Labor has delivered $5.3 billion in energy bill subsidies. And what that's basically done is it's artificially lowered our energy bills because they're basically taken our money and given it back to us. And what that's done is that's actually suppressed headline inflation. And what that means is that without these energy subsidies, retail electricity prices would have been 16% higher since mid-2023. And what that means is that the headline inflation would have also been higher and real wages would have been even lower. And to make matters worse, the most recent statement of monetary policy from the Reserve Bank of Australia, it projected almost no recovery in real wages by the end of 2027. So real wages by the end of 2027, according to the RBA's own forecasts, are expected to remain at late 2011 levels. So by the end of 2027, we're going to basically have lost, 16 years of wage growth. What I've done is I've actually extrapolated the Reserve Bank's forecast for real wages, and they suggest that we won't return to the pre-pandemic level for another decade. So the reality is that Labor's record in real wages has been very poor, contrary to what Spin Jim's been saying. And to just another example came out this week. So on Tuesday, the Reserve Bank of Australia released its interest rate decision, obviously kept interest rates on hold. And in the media release to that, Spin Jim claimed that Labor had delivered, quote, a boom in private sector jobs, where he claimed that, that was an actual quote, but he said that they delivered a boom in private sector jobs with, quote, 4 out of every 5 jobs created since Labor came to office, he claims, was in the private sector. But this was also a little bit loose with the truth, because what Jim Chalmers has actually done is he's included government-funded roles in what's called the non-market sector, which is basically jobs in healthcare, social assistance, education. So jobs like, NDIS jobs, etc., which have actually been the fastest growing in the economy. They're actually government-funded, or primarily government funded. So they're not really private sector jobs. And what the actual data shows is that 69% of the nation's job growth since the start of 2023 has been in this non-market sector, which is primarily government funded. The inconvenient truth is that while Australia's overall unemployment rate is 4.3%, which is low, and that's been driven by this government-funded jobs boom in, the NDIS type jobs, in non-market sector, which is your traditional private sector, the unemployment rate is 1.1% higher at 5.4%. And it's actually increased quite rapidly. So it's just simply not true to claim that, the government's boosted private sector job growth, because really over 2/3 of the job growth has actually been in this non-market government-funded sector. And the final piece of spin was delivered on Twitter recently, about a week ago, when Spin Jim claimed that Labor had boosted housing supply. But the actual data shows that only 168,600 homes were added to the nation's housing supply. This is once you account for demolitions in the year to September 2025. Now, since the Albanese government came to office in mid-2022, annual dwelling additions, so that's completions minus demolitions, have averaged only 161,400. Now, that's 13% below the average of 185,700 under the previous government. While housing construction has ticked up a little bit, Labor's actually delivered 13% less housing than the average under the previous government. So housing supply has actually gone down. And to make matters worse, at the same time, Labor has delivered the biggest migration boom in the nation's history. Between the mid-June 2022 and the March quarter of this year, which is the latest available data, we've had 1.2 million net overseas migrants land in Australia, which is an absolute record. Over Labor's first 1,005 days in office, over that same period, net overseas migration has averaged an astonishing 1,222 people a day. So every single day, just over 1,200 net migrants have landed in Australia since this government was elected. And as a result, Australia's population has exploded by 1.5 million people between mid-June 2022, when Labor came in, and the March quarter of this year. Now, Labor's immigration explosion at the same time as we had this sluggish housing supply is the primary reason why Australia's experienced a worsening housing shortage and rental crisis, because population demand under Labor has just run so far ahead of actual supply. So the takeaway here, Phil, is yes, all politicians accentuate the positive and eliminate the negative. That's just what they do. That's obviously all politicians do that. But Spin Jim Chalmers has taken it to another level recently, and he's claimed that Labor has boosted real wages, private sector jobs, housing supply. All those claims don't really stand up to scrutiny. And personally, mate, I'd like to see ABC Fact Check basically start doing fact checks on these sorts of things, because he's the treasurer of the country. And he should be talking, honestly and realistically about the state of the economy and those sorts of things, instead of trying to spin things as a positive all the time, because what we really need from our politicians is truth. And, it's one of the reasons why most Australians now can't stand politicians. Well, I mean, I guess, they've never been the most popular people, but really trust in our political establishment has never been lower than it is now. And we really need our senior politicians. And I think the Treasurer should be one of the most honest politicians out there in terms of, giving us the facts on the economy, the real deal. And if he keeps telling us that everything's great when it's not, we're just going to get angry. And also, he needs to actually give us the harsh medicine, tell us how it really is, because then if he does that, we're more likely to accept difficult decisions, the sort of difficult decisions that we need to push the country forward. Because the first step of, fixing a problem is to admit that you have a problem. And the economy isn't travelling very well. We have structural problems on a whole range of areas. Our productivity growth is terrible. And we need to turn that around. But in order to turn that around, you need our treasurer to be honest about the situation and give it to us real. I mean, Labor's so far ahead in the polls, they're not going to lose office. He should use this bad news on the economy as a way to basically drive reform forward and say, look, we're in this bad spot, but we need to dig a way out of it, and here's how you do it. Instead of just saying, no, everything's fine, everything's great, housing supply is great, wages are great, jobs are great, all this sort of stuff, when clearly they're not.
Well, people can find out all about this information. That's pretty amazing stuff, looking at the graphs as well. It's just incredible. Where can they go, Leith?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. They can go to macrobusiness.com.au.